Hello everyone, thank you for waiting, thank you for coming all the way up to the second floor. Thank you for waiting. We had slight technical difficulties. Turns out my laptop is not very good. External display is not working. I'm Tom Nom Nom, and I'm going to talk to you about passive-ish recon techniques. I'll explain that in a sec, don't worry. So firstly, me, I'm just a guy who hunts bugs for fun sometimes. I don't work in security professionally, I'm not a pen tester, I'm not a security researcher, which seems to be on everyone's Twitter bio these days. I'm a technical consultant at Skybetting and Gaming, one of the platinum sponsors. I do bits of training and teaching and all that kind of thing. On Twitter, I'm Tom Nom Nom. GitHub, Tom Nom Nom. On HackerOne, Tom Nom Nom as well. So first off, passive-ish. I think we should define that up front. So really, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things I've come across for reconnaissance where you either don't connect to the target directly, and so they're passive from the target's perspective, or at least they kind of look at a little bit like normal browsing traffic. In particular, like if you're looking at traffic graphs, I don't want to put big spikes in them. I don't want to trigger intrusion detection systems, that kind of thing. So often when we're talking about reconnaissance for a target, people are often talking about asset identification. So what's their online footprint? What domains have they got? Subdomains, IP ranges, third-party accounts, that kind of thing. Bug trackers, GitHub accounts. Maybe what employees have they got, depending on what level of permission you've got for your target. Really, for me, it can be anything. Some wise dude once said, knowledge is power, and I absolutely agree. And partly, to be honest, I just enjoy it. I like to pretend I'm a private detective with a notice board with all bits of information, bits of string on pins, joining all the things together. I like to imagine myself that way. It's not the way it really is, though. So one of the things people often kind of leap to when it comes to asset identification, that kind of thing, is finding all the subdomains. Like, what hosts have this company got online, this target? What things can I find? And there's a bunch of different ways to go about that. So there's some fairly obvious ways, brute forcing. There's a bunch of tools for that. Quite like ReconNG myself. You can get whatever word lists you like. DNS Dumpster, don't know if anyone's familiar with that. ThreatCrowd's fairly good as well, although often includes things that are not part of that company, just sort of loosely affiliated. Census, Zumai, Shodan as well, which is not listed on there. If you've got a fair amount of disk space, Rapid7 have some forward DNS logs that they publish on scans.io. And they're actually really useful. It's basically all of the domains and subdomains, all of the DNS entries that they know about. If you've got enough disk space, you can download that and grep through it. It'll take a long time, but actually that can be fairly effective. Certificate transparency logs as well, very useful. Actually found something using those the other day. Google, I think people are fairly comfortable with Google these days. Also Bing, I know, a bit shocking. Sometimes you get different results. I nearly put DuckDuckGo up on there as well, but actually most of those results come from Bing, in my experience. And also, one thing I've not seen people use is CSP headers. So you get these content security policy headers on web applications these days that say what things can be included in the web page, what things can run. And sometimes you find little extra bits of information. So this is just HackerOne's thing. I'm a bit of a walking HackerOne billboard because they seem to like giving out free clothes. And sometimes you'll find things in there. It's worth looking. Just pay attention. Who's ever done a Google docking? So you go to Google, say, I'm looking at yahoo.com. I want to find URLs that end in .php because PHP things are obviously insecure, right? Everyone knows that. That kind of thing is fairly common. What I don't see so much of is why look at the target directly? Employees are terrible for putting things in Pastebin. Have a look at Pastebin instead. If you know, in this case, this is a search for a target I was looking at as part of a bug bounty program. I found out they had all their internal stuff on their name .net, which I think is pretty common. So I'll have a look for that. And here's an employee's SSH config. Just helpfully pasted into Pastebin for me. Google indexed it. Lovely. Some production config for some Java application. Very helpful. Very kind of them. Thank you very much. Obvious thing. If there's source code you can read, you should read it. black boxing stuff is hard. I'm not a good black box hacker or tester or anything like that. I find it really difficult. I like to white box things. So if they've got source code on their GitHub page, and don't forget about like GitLab, Bitbucket. Everyone kind of, well, there's nothing on GitHub, so they mustn't have anything. They might have things hosted elsewhere. And not just code that they've written. Look at their forked repos as well. And that'll tell you maybe what things they're using internally. If you found, for example, an SSRF, server-side request forgery vulnerability, it might give you information about the kinds of things you should target. We're just looking for information. Client-side JavaScript. We've been given this incredible gift that pretty much by definition, the source code for a web application is sent to your browser and you can read it. Which is sort of, back before people wrote web applications, it's sort of, well, I don't know how anything works. Whereas now, no one wants to write server-side applications. They just write an API and they just shove all of their application logic down to your browser for you. And you can read that, find out how it works, find client-side vulnerabilities like DOM XSS and DOM open redirects, that kind of thing. But also, a lot of the time, they'll include information. Because most web applications have got admin panels. And who wants to really split their JavaScript bundle into two anyway? And send one half for customers and one half for admins. So I'll just bundle it all together. No one reads all that stuff anyway. I do. And often I'll find your admin API endpoints. And sometimes maybe notice from reading it, there's no cross-site request forgery protection on it. And maybe I can send you a link that will do horrible things in your application. And also for this, grep is your friend. Some code bases are really, really big. Think, what would I like to find in this? What keywords could I use in order to find those things? Things like password, API key, authorization. More on that one later. Another thing that can help you is a tool called TruffleHog. Anyone heard of TruffleHog? Cool. TruffleHog is great. It's very, very clever. It's fantastic. So TruffleHog will take any Git repository, look through all of the source code, all of the commits, all the history, deep dive into it, and look for what it calls high entropy strings, which are often secrets, SSH keys, that kind of thing, passwords, encryption keys, all those kinds of things. It goes and snorts them out for you and hunts them. So this is a target a friend and I were looking at a couple of weeks back, and we found just out on GitHub password, buried about several directories deep, where maybe not that many people would think to look. Android applications. This is actually one of my favorite things. I don't talk to that many people who bother doing this. Does anyone write Android applications? No? So I've talked to a couple of people who do, and it's not really in the forefront of their mind that when they build an Android app, put it on, I always get mixed up with what it's called, the Play Store. Is it Play Store? Yeah. The people might be able to go and decompile that and read their source code. They're not really thinking like you do when you're writing client-side JavaScript. You go, obviously, you would never put a password in client-side JavaScript. But apparently, some people will put them in Android applications. So this is a target I was looking at a while back. And they were doing, turns out, bug reporting. And my slides are going ever so slightly skew-iffy. Never mind. They were using their own Jira instance for bug reporting, and they just baked the basic authorization header into the APK. That's kind of a bad idea. So this is a screenshot of their Jira instance, which was public-facing on the internet. And there's a little bit highlighted down here, so and it's a little bit difficult to read, so I'm going to get a bit CSI on you and enhance. This was a Jira administrator account for their bug tracker, which would presumably include all of their other bugs, security bugs, things that weren't fixed yet, issues with customers, customer data. It's an administrator account, so I could have just created my own backdoor. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And when I found, I've never been so disappointed that a program didn't pay bounties as when I found this. Although I did get quite a lot of chocolate and a t-shirt, which was 2 sizes too small. One of the really useful things I found when trying to map out like what URLs are there on an application is archive.org have this wonderful, wonderful thing, the Wayback Machine. Anyone ever used it? To like go let's take a trip down memory lane and look at the website that I made in 1999 that I deleted, and then cringe really hard about your emotional blogs that you posted. Particularly with bigger targets and things that have been around a long time, you can find some really interesting stuff. So this is a little tool I wrote called Wayback URLs. The address is at the bottom. I'll share slides later, so you don't have to write it down or anything. Which basically just goes to the Wayback Machine API, pulls down all the URLs that it knows about for a particular domain and any subdomains of that domain. And often you'll get a lot, but then you can grep them. Look for interesting things. So this grep pattern I've got down here, I'm looking for basically any query string parameter that has a slash in it. Because my hypothesis, I suppose, is maybe there's something where I'm passing in a file path. And that's exactly what I found. So if you saw this URL down the bottom, can people read that? Story_get.cgi, so it's old. Story name equals something with slashes in something.html. I don't know about you, but if I saw that, I'd be straight on it. And looking at, well, maybe I'm going to look at Etsy password instead. Or not that. I'm going to look at Etsy hosts because I'm a nice guy. I'm not going to steal people's password files just for the sake of it. Honest. Something I've been looking at more recently, which kind of sometimes works, is link shortener archives. So there's a URL just off the bottom of the screen. Oh, I fixed it. Hooray. So URL team are a group of people who basically brute force link shortener URLs. So all the random digits and A to Z, 0 to 9 and all that kind of thing, and see where they go, and then they keep track of them. And they're doing it because they worry that if, say, tinyURL go bust, like half the links on the internet are going to be dead. And I think that's a worthwhile cause. They put them up on archive.org. That also means I can download them, and in particular the case of a very big target, where people are quite likely to link to them, I can use that to map out the application and find interesting things. And it's the kind of thing that tools like DIR Buster and those kinds of things are never going to find, because they're not looking for query string parameters. They're just, yes, this file exists. But that doesn't actually tell me that much about what it might do, what parameters it might have. So the US, are they the Ministry of Defense? Yeah. Have a bug bounty program, so they're actually a pretty good use case for this. Basically anything .mil I'm looking for here. And similar again, marines.mil/pages, photodetails.aspx, item URL equals some URL. So I don't know about you, but I'm looking at that and thinking, I've got to have a look at that and maybe put in my own image. And maybe at a minimum I can make my own images display in the page. Maybe something's going to be unescaped. Maybe I can fetch something internally instead, which would be particularly bad in the case of the US military. At a minimum, turns out people will paste all kinds of things into URL shorteners, and here using it to build password lists, that kind of thing, kind of useful for that. So we've already mentioned GitHub a little bit around finding source code and that kind of thing, and that's kind of useful, but humans tend to be the weak point for corporations, it seems. And very helpfully, companies these days trying to get their tech brand on point have a nice GitHub account, and a whole bunch of the people who work for them will be listed there, and you can click on their profiles and see what they have. Work-life balance, maybe not so great in some places. So people sort of share configs between things. They're at work the whole time. And one of the things that people tend to do these days is store their dot files, their configuration files in a GitHub repo, because they've got a machine at home, they've got a machine at work, they want to share them between the two so they don't have to maintain two separate bits of config files. And that's fine, unless your git ignore discipline is not so great. So this is a commit for someone removing their bash history from their dot files, which is kind of a problem if at any point you've maybe, say, exported an API token into an environment variable, in the case of this person. Kind of a problem. And if you're really clutching at straws trying to figure out, like, what tech do they even use? Like, they've not got any server headers, they've not got file extensions, you can't find any information about them. Go and have a look at their careers page. See what they're hiring for. So we're using Node.js, React, PHP, Mongo, MySQL, RabbitMQ, Chef, and Docker. I'm like, actually, I know a fair bit about your infrastructure now. There's things I can assume, so sort of using RabbitMQ, okay, you're doing some message passing type stuff. And they're the kinds of, if I'm looking at blind payloads in particular, they're the kinds of things I might try and target. Or they might even be just host names I might try and guess, like mq.yourdomain.com or something like that, because I know you've got these kinds of things internally. So that's kind of it for the passive stuff. And I want to tell you, not really a great story, but a little story, about how DI Arbluster makes me sad, and I want to set out and try and do something about that. So instead of attacking one target and sort of going, I'm just going to flood this with requests, I'm going to do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of requests, and they're going to notice it in their graphs, they're going to ban my IP, I don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to try and look for one thing in lots and lots of places. And to test this idea, I decided I was going to HackerOne's Hack the World competition this year. I've set myself the challenge of using these breadth-first techniques only. I want to place in the top 30. If you place in the top 100, you get a t-shirt. So, spoiler alert, at least in the top 100. I needed some targets. Thankfully, HackerOne provide a GraphQL endpoint for which you can write a query that looks like this, which will return all of the in-scope domains and URLs for all of the programs that I have access to on HackerOne. And then I wrote a tool. It's a tool called Meg. It's on GitHub. And what it does is it takes a path or a group of paths and a group of hosts, and it will request that path for every host in a row with a bit of protection so it doesn't call one host more than once in 5 minutes. Does it very, very quickly, about 300 requests a second. But each server's only seeing a request every now and again. It's not going to show up in the graphs. It does have a proper user agent because I think that's a good idea. You could override that to like a Chrome user agent if you want to be really stealthy, but I don't recommend that kind of behavior. A little bit of a problem with that. Often you get responses to things where it says it's a 200 OK response, but actually it's not. So what I've taken to doing is using this little Vim config at the bottom so I can open up lots and lots and lots of things in lots and lots of Vim buffers, and I just go bang, 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 and cycle through the buffers really, really quickly. So you probably can't read that text, but you can see the shape of it, right? Like, does that file look interesting? Kind of. Can anyone guess what file that is? Package.json. Like, you don't even have to be able to read the text. Like, I can see them a mile off. And from seeing that, I can see that they use Grunt, they use Karma, so they use Phantom.js. I'm going to be looking for those files now. Some stats for you. So I pulled about 40,000 hosts and looked for a whole bunch of files on them. So package.json showed up 0.15%, 151% of the time. Gulp files 0.084, and these are small percentages. But I had 45,000 hosts or something like that to go at. So some of them just cropped up. And the one at the bottom, particularly interesting. And really, I was trying to do reconnaissance with this tool, but it turned out I could actually find real problems that I could submit on a bug bounty and get cash for. For example, Slack API token in a .travis.yaml file. So travis.yaml is a file you use to control the continuous integration service Travis. And this particular company wanted a message firing into their Slack instance when their build was finished. And I could also send them messages to do things like, I don't know, very convincing phishing attacks, or /maybe CSRF against their internal services, should I happen to know what they are from internal reconnaissance. .git.config. So git config file is a really useful thing you can do with Git repos. If you don't want to put like private SSH keys everywhere on all of your servers, you can just put a nice API token in your Git config and it will pull things down from a private repo. The problem is that if you then expose that on your web server, then so can I. Yeah. Turns out one of the worst things you can do is have your doc root configured to be the same as someone's home directory, because all of their files will be available, including their SSH private key. We'll just leave that one. Also, requesting slash can be useful. And I was doing this just to sort of, I'll get the home page for everything, and then I'll grep for some interesting things and see what's around. But it turns out one of the things you can find is dangling C names, for example, pointing at unregistered S3 buckets, which you can then take over. So I have like a little shell script that runs a bunch of greps for the kinds of error messages you get for those unregistered accounts. Find a few of those. Found another one, another $600. Hooray. Well, but it also turns out you can look for vulnerabilities directly with a tool like this in lots and lots of places at once. So I'll just pick kind of an obvious payload. So I'm looking for path-based cross-site scripting. So the path is reflected in the page. I'm just going to go pass in %3c, which is the less than, and then maybe a double quote. And I'm just going to grep for it in all the results in the files I've saved. And chances are I'll find one thing out of maybe 40,000, but I found one thing. Krylov injection or line feed injection. Anyone familiar with line feed injection? So the gist is you insert a line feed character, it's reflected to you into the response as part of the headers. Now you can insert your own headers, like setting cookies for session fixation attacks, or maybe a location header to do a redirect or something like that. You can find those directly. Open redirect's kind of the same. There's a bunch of fairly standard generic payloads you can fire at anywhere. And again, maybe 0.1% of the time you'll find something. Kinds of things where if you're looking at one target by itself, you might not bother. If you're looking at 40,000, you should totally bother. CORS config errors, I think, actually pretty common these days. People aren't familiar with CORS. It's basically a mechanism for you to specify headers, so you can say this site can access my site and also send credentials and that kind of thing. You can send headers with Meg, so you can say for origin HTTPS evil.com, what returns an access control allow origin evil.com header. That might be vulnerable to me stealing your customer's details. So the results are in. I placed 17th, so it kind of works. I made maybe a few $1,000s in the process, which was really, really nice. And this has been really, really fast. So well done for keeping up, if you kept up. So I want your ideas, I want your questions. Silence. Yeah. So I just used HackerOne in this case. I've been really, really lucky and got invited to a whole bunch of private programs on HackerOne, which gives me a real big incentive to hack there and puts me far higher up the leaderboards than I actually deserve to be. So I actually just stuck to HackerOne in this case. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone.